All right, good morning again, everyone. Noticing a lot of new faces. Just show of hands, who was not here for part one? Oh, you're all gonna be so lost. No, I'm kidding, it's fine. We're gonna do a quick recap of what happened in part one, and hopefully you should be able to get caught up pretty quick. So for those of you who weren't in part one, we do have some resources here. The big one is going to be this GitHub repo, which has all of the code that we're going to talk about today in it. It also has everything from part one, so you can go through that and look at it as well. So I'll give you all a few minutes to get that URL and download that repo. And then we also have a Slack channel for this session in particular, where we've been sharing some solutions that we worked on in the last session, and we'll do the same here. And if you aren't on the MacAdmin Slack yet, you can get an invite at macadmins.org, and it's free, so definitely join. Is there anyone that still needs the URL to that GitHub repo up on the screen? Okay, we've all got it. Cool. So I'm going to start with a warning, which is do not use your production Jamf Pro server for this workshop. I'm going to say it again. Do not use your production Jamf Pro server for this workshop. And just in case you weren't paying attention, I'm going to say it a third time, do not use your production Jamf Pro server for this workshop. Neither myself nor Penn State are responsible for any data loss or damage that is done if you use your production Jamf Pro server, so don't do it. In that GitHub repo, there's a README that has a URL and credentials for a Jamf Pro server you can use that is just for this purpose. So if you don't have your own staging or development or test Jamf Pro server, you can use that one. So this is section 2. We're going to build on what we learned in section 1. But before we do that, I do want to go over curl a little bit again, since that's what we are using to work with the Jamf Pro API. So curl has 4 request types. And these request types correspond to the permission actions in the Jamf Pro server. So if you've ever seen that create, read, update, and delete section across the top of the Jamf Pro permissions, this is how they kind of line up. So you've got a get request, which is a read. You've got a put request, which is an update. And you've got a post, which is a create, and a delete, which is obviously a delete. And we'll talk more about how we use those request types in a little bit. There's also some flags that we're going to use. The -u or --user. This is the flag you use to specify the username and password that we're using for authentication. And we'll see how that works in a little bit. There's also the -s or --silent, which suppresses if you used curl before, you know it gives you like a progress bar and some stats and stuff, and it suppresses all of that, so you just get the data that you're looking for. So that becomes really important when you start working with this inside of code and automation. There's also the -H or --header, which is what you use to supply an extra header in the request, and we're going to talk about that in just a minute. And these are some new flags that we didn't have in the first session. There's the -x or --request, which is how you specify a custom request method. Again, we'll talk about that in a bit. The -d or --data, which we're going to use to actually tell it what data to use when we're doing a put or a post request. So when we're updating or creating something, we have to give it the data that we want to update or create. And this is the flag that we use to do that. And then finally, we have the -F or --form. And this is what you would use if you wanted to upload a file instead of put your data within your code. And we'll definitely look at that as well. So I mentioned that we were going to talk about the headers. Here they are. So there's two ways to get data out of Jamf, or two formats rather. There's XML and JSON. Typically, we're going to work with XML in this course. If you're working with Python, JSON's probably the easier one to work with. It really just depends on what you're trying to do. And then notice that when we are doing a get, we preface the header with an accept. But when we're doing a put or a post, we preface that with a content-type. That just tells the server what content to expect in our data string. So all of these flags and examples and whatnot are in a curl reference file in that GitHub repo, so you'll have access to all those throughout this workshop. So we're first going to look today at updating a record, and to do that we're going to go over kind of how we, well, you know what, that doesn't have, hold us on a second. I meant to put in a recap here of how these requests actually work. So we're going to, real quick, just for the new folks, do a recap of just making a request. So the first thing we have is our curl command that we're calling. And then we have our flag. So we're using -su. S again is for silent, and the U is for user. Following that, we have our username :password. I'm using variables here. You can also just hard code the things into your script if you like. And then we have the header. So for this, we are telling the server that we want our response in XML, not in JSON. If you don't specify this, it will usually give you XML, but I have seen it sometimes give JSON, so it's usually best to just tell it what you want, and then you always know you're getting the data you expect. And then finally, you hit it with your Jamf Pro URL /JSS resource, and then from there the endpoint that you want to hit. In this case, it's computers. So we'll do a quick demo of that basic request, and then we'll move on to the section 2 content. So here you can see a script I've already prepared. We have a question.
Question about that. Can we use that content type to force it to give us one type of response to the other, or what it gives us is determined by the data it holds?
Okay, so the question was, can we use that content type to force which type of data we get? And the answer is yes. You're basically telling the server, like, you're going to give me the data I want in this format. So yeah, that's how that works. So here is a basic request script that I've already created. You'll find this in the repo under section 1. And basically, you'll see here I'm just using these variables here to pass the URL and the username and password into this script. And if we run this, we get our response in XML. So pretty straightforward. It's a jumbled mess, but we'll look at some ways to make that better later. So now we will move on to, where are we at here? Nope. There we go. Okay, so this is really just a more complex version of what we just saw. The first thing to note here is that we are specifying that our content type is XML. So instead of saying accept XML, we're saying I'm giving you XML. This is the data you can expect. And we're doing that because we are actually giving data to the Jamf Pro server, not requesting it from the Jamf Pro server. The other thing to look at is now we have our request type. From the first session, we learned that if you don't specify a request type, it's always going to be a GET. That's just the assumed default. So since we're now trying to update a record, we have to give it a request type. So we use the -x and put. Good way to remember the difference between put and post is put has a U in it, and it's used for update. That's how I keep straight. And then post is the other one. And then here we're using the -d flag to specify our data. Now, you'll see here we have our data contained in an XML string here. What we're doing is we're actually updating the site for a particular computer. So we're telling the server we want computer ID 1 to get moved into the New York site. So let's take a look at how that actually works. So the way that we know that we want the way that we know what that XML string looks like is we go to the Jamf Pro Server /API, and that gives us this page that's super helpful because you can actually see in real time what your responses look like. Is that really small? Yeah, is that better? Cool. So typically when I'm looking for what the XML string is, I look through the XML response body here and I try to find the thing that I want. And what I want is the site name. So here we have New York, and I can see that's nested under site. And I can see that site is nested under general, and general is nested under computer. So I know I have to specify all those strings to get that data in the right place. And so that's exactly what I've done here. You can see that this kind of matches that structure, where I've got the computer general site name, and then I name my site, and then I have to close all my tags as well. So I'm going to go ahead and fill in my info, and I'll run this. And whoa. Hey, how about that? Thank you. I had that copied to my clipboard in the last session. I guess I must have copied something else. Let's try this again. There we go. So what we got returned here is just the computer ID. And that's the response that you get when you've made a successful put or post request to the Jamf Pro server. So if I look now at my Jamf Pro server, and if I get a computer, oh, it's not ID 1, I want ID 1. So I go to my computer ID of 1, we can see now that the site is set to New York. And so just to show you that I didn't just make that change beforehand, we'll set this back to none, and we'll just run this again. And then we'll refresh this page. And you can see that our site is back in New York. It'll run, it'll put the data there, but it'll just stay the same. So the request will actually go through, but because you're replacing data with the same data, nothing changes. All right, so I'm going to give you all a few minutes to play with this script on your own. There are, I think, 250 different computers in this Jamf Pro server, so maybe just pick a random number between 1 and 250 to play with, so you're not all stepping on the same computer. And just give this a go, see if you can make it work. And we have a question. Let's get the catch box going here, because I've been playing in loud rock bands for 20 years, and I'm like half deaf anyway. So.
So it looks like in Jamf, site is a validated field, so you have to pick a value that's actually available to that field. It's not just free text, right? Correct,
yes. You do have to pick a site that is already in existence in Jamf. And the two that we have in there are New York and San Francisco for the purposes of this demonstration. So you can play around with flipping one back and forth, or and I believe you can also set it, if you want it to be a no site, you just set it to none. Is that right, Bryson?
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah.
Empty string.
Oh, it's empty string?
I think you just said back to an empty string.
You know what? We can figure this out.
But there's also a different way of doing this.
Yeah, it looks like the empty string is the way to go. Yeah, so now it's not in the site. Ooh, wait. No, the empty string might not be the way to go.
Well, it doesn't like none. I tried none, and it says no, it doesn't exist.
Yeah, I'm actually looking at something right now. 'Cause
Okay.
There's an alternative.
Cool, cool. Yeah, if you pass it none in the site XML, it seems to work. Yeah, didn't like the empty string, but none seems to work just fine. Yeah.
What is the ID of the New York site? Is it just one?
It's probably 2. I think I made the San Francisco one first. Probably can't find that here because I don't think That's okay. Okay. Has anyone had any trouble getting this to work? Or have any questions about what's happening? Okay, cool. So congratulations, at this point you all know how to update a record in Jamf using the API. Give yourselves a round of applause. So now we're going to look at how to actually create something in Jamf. And we're going to do that by creating a category. So again, there's a lot going on here, but most of this is the same as we've already seen. What's up?
I can comment on that now.
On what?
Assigning and unassigning sites.
Oh, okay, yeah, sure, go ahead.
And actually, I don't know how often you do this throughout it. So even though you can associate objects through the API using the names, if they're like a unique identifier for that object, I would actually consider that a best practice. It's safer to do it via the IDs. So instead of name attribute, you actually pass the ID of the site that you want to put it in. And then when you want to unset values through the API, you pass it a -1, and that unsets the association. So if you do ID2 in this case, and you dump it into a site, if you want to then remove it from a site, you actually set the ID to -1, and then that flips it out.
Okay, cool, so let's actually look at that in action. That was a great tip, thank you, Bryson. Oh, for those of you who weren't in session 1, this is Bryson from Jamf. He's here helping out to help answer questions, and if anyone gets really stuck in something, he's gonna sit down with you and try to figure it out, because he's a nice guy like that. So we're gonna change this name to ID, and I have to change it on the other side too. And we'll say site 2, we'll run that. And now my computer should be in the New York site. There it is, very cool. And then if I, that's not the right spot. If I pass this a -1, like Bryson said, this is basically telling Jamf that we want to put null data there. And I run that. And I'll see it's back to none. So that's how you can do it via ID. And as Bryson mentioned, it's probably better to do it via ID than the name in most cases, because names aren't always unique. Sometimes they are, but you can't always assume that they are. So it's a great tip. Thank you for that. So back to creating a record. We're going to create a category. Like I said, there's a lot going on here, but it's a lot of this is really similar to what we've already seen. Big difference we're going to see here now again is our header for content type text XML. Again, that's telling the server that we're going to be giving it XML data, and that's what it should be expecting to receive. Here's another kind of interesting, unique, cool thing here is when we're creating something, we're going to create a category, and we're going to give it an ID of 0. And what an ID of 0 actually means is it tells Jamf just use the next available ID number. That way we don't have to figure out like, oh, is ID 3 already taken? Oh, should I do 4? We just tell Jamf, just pick the next one. Because most of the time we don't actually care about what the ID number is. We just need to make the object. So yeah, so there's the 0. So whenever you're creating something new, just use ID 0. Once again, we're going to send a request type. This time it's going to be post. So we're creating something new. Remember, put is for update, post is for new. And then here's what our data set looks like. You'll see we're specifying the name of this category, which I'm making one called productivity. And then we're specifying the priority of the category. And in this case, I'm specifying priority 1. In this instance, you don't necessarily have to specify the priority. It'll go to the default if you don't, which I believe is 10. Is that right? Yeah, the default's 10. But in this case, we're specifying the priority as 1 just because it's fun. So let's take a look at that in action. So here you can see the script that I've already prepared. Go ahead and fill in my info again. And again, you can see here I've got my content type set, telling it I'm going to send it some XML. I've got my ID of 0 set here, telling it to use the next available number. I'm sending a post request because it's new data, and then here's my data. If you are going to run this, I would recommend putting something other than productivity in here. Maybe put in your name or something else so that, again, we don't all just create the same category 100 times.
Actually, you should do that twice to show what happens when you do that.
Maybe I will.
All right.
Oh, look at that. Someone already did productivity. So, this is telling me that there is a conflict. This is actually a great learning moment. Thank you for bringing that up. I should have built this in. But so this conflict is basically telling us that something with that name already exists. So we can't create another one because in Jamf, categories have to have unique names. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to change this to my name and run that. And so you can see that's more what we expect in a working command. So if I go to look at our categories, yeah, you can see we've got a lot of different ones in here. Very cool. I see no one's changed their priority though. That's fine. Just for fun, I'm gonna make one with a different priority. I'm gonna make Kitzy 2 with a priority of 11. What did I do there?
You took it to 11.
Yeah, exactly. That's not the button I wanted. Yeah, Kitzy 2 goes to 11, which is why I'm half deaf now. So, I'll give you all a couple minutes to play with that if you want to try making a couple categories, different priority numbers, whatever you want to do. Feel free to just blow my JSS up with categories. And has anyone not been able to get this to work? Or have questions about what's happening here? We have the catch box. We get over here.
So I was able to create the category originally, and then I wanted to update the priority. So I changed the command from post to put. Is there anything else required in that? Because it looks like it's not taking it.
Okay, so you have your category here, and you change this to put, right?
Right, because it's already created.
And then you change your priority, right? Mm-hmm. So the problem you're running into is this ID 0. So you would have to actually find out what the ID of your category is and hit that specifically. So like if I go to Kitzy 2 and then I look up here in the address bar, I can see that it's ID 20. So if I put ID 20 there in my put request, now I can update it.
That makes sense. Thank you.
No problem. It's a great question.
And also just a note for that, you don't need to include the name in the put. You're only changing the priority, so you can get rid of the name tags and just do the priority tag.
Got it.
Yeah, that's a great point. You only need to put in the tags of the data that you're trying to update. You don't have to give it the full gamut of data. Who had the question?
So when you're creating a category, why are you specifying an ID to begin with?
So the ID 0 is just what tells Jamf to create a new record, basically.
Gotcha.
Do you have a more in-depth answer than that?
So that'll always be 0 then if you're doing it.
If you're creating, yeah, you want to do ID 0.
Yes, and fun thing that I discovered while building that populator script, I had forgotten to add ID 0 onto the endpoints I was doing, and it still worked. And I went to go follow up with our API relations team about that, because historically that never worked. That was actually something they added into the product at some point. Sam couldn't track down exactly when it was, but you can actually now, like most other sensible APIs, post just to the resource itself, so /computers, and that will create one. But he also said that when he had talked to another developer about it, it's not as performant as going straight to the original /ID/0 resource.
Okay.
So even though it works, it's probably best practice just to keep using /ID/0 in the classic API, especially if you're doing mass actions.
So there you go. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Awesome. Nice, that does work.
I mean, it looks nice in code, but
Yeah. I'm also assuming this is an undocumented feature.
I actually have to go look at the documentation to see. Well, /ID0 was never really documented either. It's in the notes.
Okay.
And then there was this change. I know that in the UAPI, /ID/0 that's not used at all. But that's the UAPI. We're not going to talk about that.
Yeah. Okay. So here in the API on the GUI there, it tells you to specify an ID of 0 to create an object. All right. Do we have any more questions about putting or posting data before we move on? Cool. So now we're going to look at deleting. Now that we've created a bunch of categories, let's go ahead and delete some of them. Again, you'll see this is very similar to what we had before with the curl, the -su, and all that. So you can delete things by name or by ID number. Like Bryson said earlier, doing it by ID number is probably a whole lot safer than doing it by name. Just to keep things simpler in this class, we're going to just do it by name here. So you'll specify your endpoint, which is JSS resource /categories, then /name/productivity for that's the one we're going to delete. And then here we have our header. We're specifying with $X and delete. And you'll notice there's no additional data here. We don't have to specify any XML or anything like that because we're just deleting something. We don't need to tell it anything more than we've already told it. So let's take a look at that in action. So go ahead and populate my stuff again. So I will delete the Kitzy category. And again, we'll see that it gives us back this ID number as, you know, our confirmation that the operation worked. And now if we try to go to ID 11, it's not there because it's been deleted. So go ahead and give that one a go. Try and delete one of the categories you made. Or
How
if
do you
you
handle a category with a space in it? Excuse me.
a category with a space in it, that's a good question. Would that be like a %20?
It'd be a %20. You have to do URL encoded characters.
Yeah.
So this is another situation though where my recommendation is always going to be use the ID whenever possible.
I did mention that when you were out of the room.
Bless your heart.
Hi. You said the ID that would return would be the priority that you put in previously, right?
So it's not the priority. The ID is the ID number of the object in Jamf.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Never mind.
These just happen to be the same priority, so I could see how that would be, or the priority and the ID number were the same, so I could see how that would be confusing. But like if I do Kitzy 2, does Mari delete my Kitzy 2?
Yeah, that's the one you just deleted.
Well, I just deleted Kitzy, not Kitzy 2. What about Kitzy 3? There we go. So this one's ID 54, and that's just the number of the object.
If you don't want to do a get statement to figure out what your ID is, just hover over it in the web console and you'll see the URL at the bottom. It's got the ID in it.
Oh, nice. Okay. Yeah, that's a good point. So if we look here, and if we just hover over one of these, you probably can't see it here on the screen, but in the bottom left, it shows you the URL and the ID number is just in that. That's a really quick way to figure it out. Another thing you could do, let's see, I'm going to make another one so I can play with it. So another thing that you could do is you could actually, if you wanted to be real safe, instead of deleting it by name, you could do something like this. Yeah. What is that? Category ID, okay. So this XML-lint XPath thing is the thing we went over in the first part of the session. So for those of you who weren't in that, essentially what we're doing here is we're piping the output of this whole command here to XML-lint, which is using a flag called XPath to essentially what it's doing is it's looking through the XML structure, going down category ID, and then this text function is actually going to return the ID, the text that's stored in that record. So what we could do here is set this as a variable, like so. And then instead of specifying the name here, we specify the ID. And then we just use the return of that previous command. So, so basically what I'm doing here is I'm looking for, hang on, I missed a step here. I'm looking for category by name. There we go. Okay. So name Kitzy. So essentially what I'm doing is I'm getting the full kind of XML of the category named Kitzy, and then I'm paring it down to just the ID number and storing that in the variable jamf_ID. And then in my next command, my delete command here, I'm using that variable that I pulled from before. So this is probably how you'd want to do a delete instead of doing it by name if you don't know the ID number of something. So I think I can run that, and I did something wrong. Thank you. There we go. So so that dash on the end, for those of you that weren't in the first session, is XML-lint is normally expecting you to pass it a file name to read from, and this dash just says read the output of standard out from the last command. So it's just a way to tell it where to get the data. Yes?
I see the problem with the spaces would still exist in this scenario because you're still searching based on name.
Yes.
To get the IDs, you'd still have to encode the spaces.
Yeah, so if you have a space, you would just do a %20 and then the next word. So you would have to do that. And that's why spaces are bad. All right, any questions on what we did? Does anyone have any trouble getting their delete command to work?
So this only works for specifically searching for that. You made a Kitzy 2 category, but unless you typed Kitzy 2, it's not going to like search and tell you there's 2 that include that word.
No, it's going to be an exact match only.
Okay, so I'm just thinking if somebody has 2 categories that begin with the same word or something and they accidentally delete the wrong one. So is there any way to search, other than pulling the ID, is there any way to search multiples at once, kind of?
Yeah, there is actually. So what you would do, here, I'll just make a new one real quick. So what you want to do is you'd want to get rid of this XML-lint, and you would just want to, you can basically just hit the endpoint with nothing specified after it, and then that's going to give you all the categories, and then we can do the XPath there and say, that's probably not going to work. So yeah, you'd have to, I guess you could pipe this to like a grep and search for the name that you want and then do the XPath. Bryce, do you have a better way to do that?
Python.
Do you have a better way to do that in Bash?
I'm not really good with looping in Bash, but in XPath XPath, there is syntax for you to iterate over an array to find a value that matches an attribute name, and then you go retrieve that. If I might be able to find it on Jamf Nation. I posted an example for this for how to programmatically retrieve a single value of an extension attribute out of a computer record using that search syntax where it was actually doing name matching.
Yeah, if you can find that and post it in the channel, that would be awesome.
I will. Also, for those of you who are wondering why you can't delete your categories, I posted the code that I accidentally ran, which just mass deleted a bunch of them before I stopped it. So,
thanks, Bryson.
Be careful when you hit enter while writing things.
I knew you were gonna be trouble. The good news is you have code to create more categories if you really need to. So. All right, before we move on, does anyone have any questions about deleting objects? Or does anyone have any trouble getting a delete command to work?
Ooh, I found it.
that wasn't caused by Bryson deleting your category.
Hey, I found the other code.
The one to loop through?
Yeah,
Sweet.
there we go.
Drop that in Slack.
Yep.
Nice. Okay, cool. Do you want to maybe come up here and talk us through what this is doing?
Yeah, if I even remember what it's doing.
Oh, come on, you can read it.
All right, so XPath syntax we got going on here. In this case, I'm doing matching based upon extension attribute ID values. So again, I did everything using IDs, but this would work exactly the same way if you were looking for the value of the name attribute. So we're grabbing the XML here, kind of like how you saw before, and then I'm then extracting the value here. So little different. I'm actually calling XPath directly instead of using XMLint, but it's still XPath. It doesn't matter. All that matters is the string here. So I don't quite remember how. Oh my God, Kitzy. There.
Yeah,
you got force push turned on. You can turn that off. You know.
I just set this laptop up this morning. I'm sorry.
Okay. Well, anyway. So I don't quite remember the double slash syntax here, but as you can see, I'm kind of ignoring a lot of the top level tags, and I'm actually just telling it to go find an ID value matching the EID, and then for that value, I'm getting the text of it, which there's probably a shorter hand way of doing that I probably didn't come across. I'm also, when you're performing a search using XPath like this, it actually dumps out a lot of stuff to standard error, I believe, when it's trying to do this. So this redirect to null, that's just me telling it don't print standard error at all. Just get standard out. So this XPath syntax is, oh my God, this XPath syntax is iterating over that XML that I got back for. You can do subsets when you do API calls. I think, were you going to touch on that a little bit?
Actually, wasn't, but we can now.
So, computer mobile device records, and no, just maybe users, but they support subsets. So if you go look at the API documentation, you will see that there's a section under where it shows you the examples for computers / ID, whatever, ID name, serial, all that stuff. You have the option of then calling a subset. So whereas you saw all those sections, like you had a general section, a hardware section, and all that stuff, you actually don't need to return all the XML if you don't need all the XML. You can just state the key name for that section, and you'll just get that. So like in this case, I was only getting extension attributes, so I didn't have to it wasn't going to parse through the whole XML return for that computer record, just the extension attributes. So that's actually why I'm getting away with this. So like normally in a computer record, you would have lots of different things in there that had an ID value. I'm only grabbing extension attributes, so I'm cheating here and writing less code in my XPath because there's only going to be an array of extension attributes, and those are the only things that'll have IDs, so I can easily go find the object that has that ID and then pull out the value. Oh yeah, that's what it was. It's actually finding the object that matches that ID, and then the other tag next to the ID is the value.
Yeah.
That's what it is. I'm getting the text for the value key. That's what it is. Which, if we go to your JSS here, and we go look at, oh wait, you're not going to have any extension attributes though.
No, but there's computers.
There are computers. So we go looking through this. So extension attributes right down here. So it's empty right now, but there would be a list of them. So under extension attributes, there would be starting and stopping extension attribute, then ID, then value, then name, and then close extension attribute, and then the next one. And that's how I was pulling that out. I'm gonna get out of here.
Cool. Thank you, Bryson. So where something like a subset would really come in handy is if you're doing something in mass. You're looping through every computer in your Jamf Pro server and doing something with it. If you know that you only need stuff from the general section, then it would be much easier and faster to just pull the general and parse that than pull the entire computer record. Does that make sense? Is everyone following that?
It doesn't speak.
It doesn't speed it up on server-side processing because it's still, I don't believe they actually optimized like the queries for only retrieving that data, but it's less data that actually has to come back through the pipe. So if you're doing things in mass, the HTTP requests will be faster.
They'll be faster, and then depending on what you're doing with that data, your parsing of it could be faster as well, and you're storing less data in memory, so it's more efficient for sure. But for single one-off things like we're doing here, it's not really going to make much of a difference. All right. Now, where were we? I don't even remember. Oh, okay, cool. So this is actually one of my favorites. If anyone doesn't know, there is this file attachments section for computers and mobile devices, and you can attach literally any file you want here. And that's pretty cool, but you can also do this from the API, which is even cooler. So here's what the code to do that would look like. Again, you were seeing a lot of the things we've already done, but here the endpoint we're hitting is file uploads, and then we're specifying that we're uploading to a computer record with the ID of 1. Once again, we're doing a post here because this is a new file. So we're using the $X to specify our request type. And then here, we're using that -F flag, and that's what we're using to specify the file. And then we just put the path to file in there after the @ sign. Bryson, do you know why we need the @ sign in this particular command? I never could find that out.
There are different ways of, it has to do with the fact that you're actually referencing a file path.
Okay.
Because what you're doing here is that -F, you're actually starting a multi-part form encoded request. So one part of the form here you're defining is the name for the file, because instead of like file equals, Jamf expects it to be name equals, and then you have to tell it to actually go load in the contents of that file. So like if you were doing a multi-part form encoded request and you had multiple fields that you were actually submitting, you would do a -F key equals value for each one of them.
Gotcha. Okay. Okay, that makes sense. Does everyone follow that? That's okay. Just know that this is how you upload a file. That's the important takeaway here. So let's look at that in action. And once again, oh, come on. All right, and then we need a path to a file. So I'm actually just going to do, the Jamf log. And this is actually, this is definitely a real world example. We use this at Fastly. We actually have a button in self-service that users can press that will take their entire var log and put it in a zip file and then upload that as an attachment to their computer record. So when we're troubleshooting with people who are remote, we just gave them a quick one-click button to send me all your logs so I can look at them. So that's one way this could be used. It's pretty cool. So we're going to run this. Did I have to do anything else? Nope, I don't think so. Run ended. It did not work. What did we miss? Let's get silent, see if I can get something. Couldn't open the file. Oh, because I probably need sudo for that. So let's just... I don't have a Jamf log. Okay, that makes sense. Just going to make a dummy file, and we're going to use that. Unauthorized. Ooh.
Put it in user shared.
What's that?
Put it in user shared. Now you don't have to worry about the script.
So the authorization is actually coming from the Jamf server. So now we get to play with some permissions. Honestly, the hardest part of working with Jamf API I've found is figuring out what permissions you need to do something. So let's see. I wonder if we need create for computers. Let's try that. Yes, okay. So that's the fun one. You need to create permission on the computer object to create a file upload. Good to know. So now, if we go to the computer 1, and there we can see, looks like we've got another. Let's see what this is. All right, cool. I'm glad that wasn't something terrible. Cool, so I will give you all a few minutes to play with that, give that a go. Maybe pick a different ID than 1 if you want to, do something special.
Would you be willing to share that script for your roll up the logs and upload?
We'll get back to that. So for the video, the question was if I'd be willing to share the script for setting the logs up to the computer record, and yeah, we'll get there.
Is there a limit to the number of files you can attach to a record?
So the question is there a limit of the number of files you can attach to a record? I don't know. Do you know, Bryson?
No, but be wary of how much you abuse this feature because you're loading things into the database.
Yes, that is a good point. You are storing these files in the MySQL database, so I maybe wouldn't upload the entire contents of a user's home folder. Yeah, when we do our troubleshooting with the logs, we typically, once we get them, we delete them from the record so they don't just live there forever. So it's really more of a temporary, storage space for them.
Bonus points.
If
you're going to do this, make yourself a daily task that scans your computer records, finds log files that were attached that are older than X amount of time, and then auto deletes them.
Okay, cool. That's what you're doing for the challenge.
I'm not doing your work for you, Kitzy.
No, it's the challenge to make sure you absorbed what you've learned. I think we had a question. Can we get the catch box going again?
So I'm just curious why there's no output. We've gotten a response from every other API call. Why is there no response to this?
That's a great question. Why is there no response to this? Do you know?
You don't see it in curl, but I believe that the response for a file upload is a 204, and a 204 just states that it's successful and there's no response body. It's not creating like a JSS object, it's attaching something to a record, but not directly through the record, through that record's endpoint. And I'm going in circles here, but like, it's not really creating an object per se, it's attaching something to another object, so there's no ID value to return. Although there would be an ID value if you go look at it in the record.
Yeah.
It's an upload, and they chose to do a 204 response for it, that's all.
It's one of those things where if you see no output, you did it right. Otherwise, you're going to get some kind of error. Yeah. So, was everyone able to get an upload to work? Does anyone have any questions about file uploads? All right. So that means that you're all ready for the challenge, which is to write a script that uses a computer serial number to find its Jamf ID, and then upload the computer's jamf.log as a file attachment.
Is there a bonus?
There's no bonus for this one. Sorry. I guess the bonus would be do it in Python. Or do the thing Bryson said. I will tell you that all the bits and pieces you need to do this are already in the different code examples that you have in that GitHub repo. So if you get lost, go there. There's also in the solutions folder a working solution for this as well. I would encourage you to try to work it out yourself before you go straight to that. I also do want to point out that since your computers are not enrolled in this Jamf Pro server, the actual serial number finding and then using that against the Jamf Pro server won't work. So I guess just fake that part. Just grab a serial number from the Jamf server and put it in a variable, and we'll call that good enough. Of course, Bryce and I are here if you get stuck or have any questions along the way.
Correction, it's a 201, but they don't return a response body. And that's it.
Oh, you mean for the file uploads?
Yeah.
Okay, 201 response.
It is a 201, but it's also just, there's no response
There's
message.
no response. Okay, cool.
You're not searching by ID, okay? So collapse that with the bogey. You're actually searching by serial number, which has no underscore in it. We got to put in the serial number. Yeah, so it's taking out your underscore and your
So we've got about 10 minutes left in this workshop before we all get kicked out of the room. Does anyone have a working prototype yet? Would you like to share your working prototype with the rest of the class? You can share it in Slack, or you can come up here and talk about it.
If they post it in Slack though, then they can come up and just, have it shown.
Yeah.
Here instead of doing the HDMI dance.
That's true. Yeah, if you want to post it in Slack, I can put it up on the screen. You can come up and talk about it and tell people what you did, if you want. Do you want to come up and talk about it, or? walk us through it? Grab the catch box on your way so everyone can hear you.
So this is pretty easy for a challenge, I think, because we basically just took from 2 other examples. So we took an existing serial number from the JSS and grabbed the Jamf ID by using capturing that as a variable, and used the curl command from the upload file example, and just had to replace the ID with the variable name and specify a path to a file.
Awesome.
So,
can we see it work?
sure. Well, probably need to delete. Well, can I send your system log? Just so that
Yeah.
make it a little easier.
There it is. Very nice. So since none of you can actually do the bit about automatically getting the serial number, I'll show you how I did it here in this solution. And yeah, I'll have to do system.log as well. I don't know why this machine doesn't have a Jamf log, but that's a problem for another time. So yeah, I'm doing the exact same thing we just saw, except I'm actually using the system profiler command with an awk command to get the serial number programmatically from the machine. So this would basically be pretty much how you would put this in self-service if you just wanted one specific log file. It would just be a couple extra steps to zip the whole log folder and upload that instead. And so if we run this, succeeded. And if we go to, I think I'm 261. Yeah, there I am. And so there's the system.log. So we have 7 minutes left. Does anyone have any general questions about the API or what we've covered today, or really anything? I taught it that well, huh?
What are workflows that you're looking forward to trying to do with this newfound knowledge of yours?
Can we get the catch box over to Adam there?
So one of the things I've been thinking about doing is we have some policies that are triggered by being in a static group, so that I normally just manually log in on my phone in front of somebody's computer to add them to it because it's a workflow somebody else made. But I was thinking I can make something in self-service that would grab their serial number and then add that computer ID to that group, so it would just automatically kick off, so I don't have to stand in front of someone's computer to enable encryption using this policy, for instance.
Yeah, that's a great way to do that. I actually do a lot of static group stuff as well, using the API to put computers in and out of the groups when needed.
Do you want to quickly pull up the API docs and show them what those special add to and remove from options in the API are?
Yeah, let's do that. That's going to be under static. No? Is it under computer groups?
Computer groups. And then just go to computer groups ID. Oh, I know. No, you're right. This one's specifically smart groups, isn't it? So
Where are those static groups?
it should be.
They're together, aren't they? They're just identified by a tag.
But we're specifically looking for an endpoint that includes the. Oh, I think it's under put.
Oh yeah, of course.
Boom, there we are.
Yeah, so basically for this, you wouldn't do a post or a delete to add or remove. You would do a put with a computer additions tag and remove it with a computer deletions tag.
So you would put an array of computer objects under that computer additions tag, and there's also the computer deletions tag so that you can remove computers from the group. Same thing works for mobile device groups and user groups, I believe.
I think so, yeah.
Maybe.
Probably.
We could look at the docs, but we're not going to.
We only have 4 minutes left. We don't have time for docs.
And then and like many other places in Jamf Pro, both ID or name tags, no, not name, but ID, serial, and UDID tags should work for this, I believe.
Yeah, I think so.
But it's probably safer to still try and stick with ID where possible. But if you're doing it locally on the system, serial should work for this.
You can also do the trick we did earlier with to get the serial number, use the serial number to get the ID, and then use the ID to put it in the thing, if you really want to do it that way. Anybody else have a workflow they want to talk about?
We have another inventory system outside of Jamf that management would like to be their one source for all inventory, and so I've heard that management tool that inventory tool is going to write a sync between Jamf and itself, but it hasn't happened yet. So until that happens, I'll probably have to write something myself that takes information out of Jamf and puts it over into this other tool.
Yeah, as long as that other tool has a pretty decent API, that shouldn't be too hard to do.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, you should be fine then.
What you might actually want to look into are webhooks. I'm riding that bandwagon again, by the way.
Oh, no.
But instead of running a job where you have to scrape your entire inventory, which takes a long time, and do all that processing, you can build a service that actually, every time computer inventory events happen, it hits your service, you get the ID of that computer record that says, hey, I just got an inventory update. Your service then, on demand, just goes back out through the API, grabs the whole inventory record, and then posts that to your other inventory management service. So that way, as your fleet is actually making changes in Jamf Pro, those changes then get reported directly into that instead of having to scrape thousands of computer records on a cron job.
That's actually a really good idea.
Does the destination system have to support webhooks?
No. So a webhook is really just Jamf Pro making a post request to something else. So as you were all doing today with curl and posting data to Jamf Pro, imagine it the other way around where Jamf Pro is making a post to another service. Now, you can't actually just point Jamf Pro at like the API of the other service because Jamf Pro is going to provide data in a format that it knows nothing to do with. They've got their own API and they've defined like, this is how you interact with our API. You're going to make the glue that sits in between where Jamf Pro is feeding it events, it then goes out, ingests Jamf Pro's data, transforms it to what the other service wants, and then uses that service's credential in order to actually do the action. It also adds a little layer of security there because Jamf Pro doesn't necessarily support like authentication mechanisms for other services, so you're creating a little integration where you put all the credentials there, and then it does all the work.
So we've got like 15 seconds before we get cut off here, so I just want to say thank you all for coming. I hope this was helpful, and I'll be around for the rest of the conference, as will Bryson. If you have more API questions, feel free to come up to us and pick our brains.